The cold steel of the Colt revolver was the only god Archer Landry had ever known, until fate made him a father on the bloodiest day of his life. It was 1875 in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and the May morning promised nothing but another day of dust and disappointment as Archer leaned against the weathered post of the livery stable, watching the stagecoach lumber into town with weary indifference. Still waiting on those supplies from Omaha? The gravelly voice of Thomas Wilson, the town's blacksmith, interrupted Archer's brooding. "Been 3 weeks," Archer replied, adjusting his worn Stetson against the glare of the morning sun. At 32, his face was already lined with the harsh realities of frontier life, blue eyes as hard as the Nebraska winter, yet striking against his tan skin and dark hair. "Cattle ain't gonna feed themselves, and I'm down to my last sack of grain." Thomas nodded knowingly. Droughts hit everyone hard this season, even the reverends praying for rain daily. Archer spat in the dust. Tell him not to waste his breath. Never seen those prayers bring a drop of rain or stop a bullet. The blacksmith sighed, having heard Archer's blasphemies many times over the 5 years since the cowboy had ridden into Scottsbluff, purchased the struggling Diamondback Ranch 10 miles outside town, and managed to turn it into one of the most prosperous cattle operations in the region through nothing but grit and ruthless determination. "One day, Landry, you might find yourself needing something more than that gun on your hip," Thomas said quietly. "Doubt it," Archer replied, pushing off from the post as the stagecoach came to a stop. "Only thing I've ever been able to count on is myself." The passengers began disembarking, mostly traveling salesmen and a few returning locals. Archer was turning to leave when a flash of emerald caught his eye, a woman in a dark green traveling dress, her honey blonde hair peeking out from beneath a modest bonnet. She stepped down carefully, one hand clutching a small valise, the other protectively cradling what appeared to be a slight swell beneath her jacket. Their eyes met briefly across the dusty street, and Archer felt an unexpected jolt of recognition, though he was certain he'd never seen her before. He would have remembered those eyes the color of summer wheat, intelligent and wary. "Who's that?" he asked, nodding toward the woman who was now speaking with the stage driver. Thomas followed his gaze. "Don't know. New school teacher, maybe? Heard Mayor Collins mentioning someone was coming to replace Miss Watkins after she married that lawyer from Cheyenne." The woman collected her trunk from the driver and glanced around, clearly uncertain where to go. Archer turned away, determined to mind his own business. Scottsbluff saw plenty of newcomers who didn't last through their first winter. No sense getting acquainted. "Mr. Landry!" Sheriff Daniels called out, striding purposefully toward him. "Got a minute?" Archer suppressed a groan. His interactions with the law, even well-meaning ones like Sheriff Daniels, rarely ended pleasantly. "What is it, Sheriff?" "Got reports of cattle rustling over at the Henderson place last night. Wondering if you've seen anything unusual near your property." "Nothing yet," Archer replied, suddenly alert. Cattle rustling had been increasing throughout the territory, and with beef prices climbing, his own herd would be a tempting target. "But I'll keep my eyes open. Might want to double your night watch. These aren't ordinary thieves, they're organized, smart. Left 3 of Henderson's men dead." Archer's jaw tightened. "Appreciate the warning." As the sheriff nodded and walked away, Archer glanced back toward the stagecoach. The blonde woman was gone, already swallowed by the bustling main street. Dismissing the strange moment of connection, he untied his stallion, Thunder, from the hitching post and mounted up. He had ranch hands to warn and defenses to strengthen. As Archer rode the 10 miles back to Diamondback Ranch, the vast Nebraska sky stretched endlessly above him. This land had been his salvation and his prison since returning from the war, a place where a man could rebuild himself from nothing but still never escape his past. The sprawling property came into view as he crested the final hill, the modest 2-story ranch house flanked by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses. His foreman, Elijah Parker, a wiry, gray-haired veteran who'd been with him since the beginning, met him at the stables. "Everything quiet?" Archer asked, dismounting. "So far," Elijah replied, "but got something strange to report. Found fresh tracks about a mile south of the creek. Looked like they were scouting the place." Archer's expression darkened. "Sheriff just told me Henderson lost 30 head last night, along with 3 men. Elijah removed his hat, running a weathered hand through his hair. "Jesus! That close?" Round up the men, double the night watch, and make sure everyone's armed. These aren't ordinary rustlers." As Elijah hurried off, Archer led Thunder into his stall, methodically removing saddle and tack. The stallion had been with him since the war, one of the few constants in his life. As he brushed down the horse's gleaming coat, his mind wandered back to the woman at the stagecoach. Something about her troubled him, like a half-forgotten melody. She'd been pregnant, that much was clear from the protective way she'd held herself. Alone and pregnant in a town like Scottsbluff, that took either courage or desperation. Neither was his concern. That night, Archer took the first watch himself, riding the southern perimeter with his Winchester across his lap. The moon hung full and bright, casting silver light across the prairie. The land was silent except for the occasional lowing of cattle and the whisper of the wind through the tall grass. He was halfway through his route when gunfire erupted from the eastern boundary. Kicking Thunder into a gallop, Archer raced toward the sound, the cold night air burning his lungs. As he approached, he could make out shadowy figures moving among the startled cattle, the flash of gunfire illuminating the scene in brief, chaotic glimpses. "Frank! Miguel!" he shouted as he recognized two of his ranch hands engaged with the rustlers. Archer raised his rifle, firing a warning shot that caused several of the rustlers to scatter. One turned, aiming directly at him, and Archer responded instinctively, a clean shot that dropped the man from his horse. The battle was brief but brutal. When it ended, two rustlers lay dead, and one of Archer's men, young Miguel Rodriguez, was clutching a bleeding arm. "You need a doctor," Archer said, examining the wound by the light of a hastily lit lantern. "I'll be fine, boss," Miguel insisted, but his face was pale beneath his tan. "Elijah, get him to town. The rest of you secure the herd and keep watch. There might be more of them." As Elijah helped Miguel onto his horse, Archer knelt beside one of the dead rustlers, searching for identification. Finding nothing, he examined the man's face in the lantern light. Young, perhaps no older than 25, with a crude tattoo on his neck that Archer recognized with a chill. The Blackwater Gang, notorious throughout the territory for their brutality. "Boss," Frank called out, holding up a piece of paper he'd found on the other rustler. "Looks like a map. Shows all the ranches in the area, and Diamondback is marked." Archer studied the crude drawing. It wasn't just his ranch that was marked. Every major cattle operation within 50 miles had been identified, with notes about herd sizes, number of men, and patrol schedules. This wasn't random rustling, it was an organized campaign. "We're going to need more men," he said grimly, "and we need to warn the other ranchers." The next morning, Archer rode into Scottsbluff to report the incident to Sheriff Daniels and arrange for the bodies to be collected. The town was already buzzing with news of the attack, and several other ranchers had gathered at the sheriff's office. "Blackwater Gang's moving north," Sheriff Daniels confirmed after hearing Archer's account. "They've been causing havoc in Colorado and Wyoming for months now. Why aren't the territorial marshals doing something about them?" demanded Bill Hawkins, whose ranch bordered Archer's to the north. "They're spread thin, and the gang moves too fast," the sheriff explained. "By the time word reaches the marshal's office in Omaha, Blackwater's already moved on." "Then we handle it ourselves," Archer stated flatly. "I'm hiring more men. Suggest you all do the same." As the meeting broke up, Archer headed to the Rusty Nail Saloon to place advertisements for experienced hands. The saloon was relatively quiet this early, with only a few patrons nursing morning drinks. He approached the bar, ordered coffee, and was discussing posting notices with the owner when the saloon doors swung open. The blonde woman from the stagecoach walked in, looking distinctly out of place in her simple blue dress. Her pregnancy was more noticeable today, perhaps 5 or 6 months along. The room fell silent as she made her way confidently to the bar. "I'm looking for Mr. Jenkins," she said to the barkeep. "I was told he owns this establishment." "That's me," the balding man replied cautiously. "What can I do for you, miss?" "Mrs. Beatrice Gray," she corrected gently but firmly. "I understand you're looking for a new pianist." Jenkins looked her up and down skeptically, his gaze lingering on her swollen belly. "No disrespect, madam, but in your condition—" "My condition does not affect my ability to play," she interrupted, her wheat-colored eyes flashing with determination. "And I assure you, I play exceptionally well." Archer watched the exchange with unexpected interest. There was something compelling about the woman's quiet dignity in the face of Jenkins' obvious dismissal. "Look, Mrs. Gray, even if you could play, this ain't exactly a place for a woman in your situation. My customers come here to drink and forget their troubles, not to mind their manners around an unmarried pregnant woman," she finished for him, her voice level despite the flush in her cheeks. "I require employment, Mr. Jenkins, not moral judgment. Perhaps a demonstration would convince you?" Without waiting for permission, she moved to the upright piano in the corner and seated herself gracefully. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the saloon was transformed. She played a lively rendition of Buffalo Gals that had even the most bleary-eyed patrons tapping their feet, then seamlessly transitioned to a moving ballad that Archer recognized from the war years. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence before several patrons burst into appreciative applause. She turned to Jenkins, one eyebrow raised in challenge. $3 a week plus tips," Jenkins said gruffly. "You start tonight." Beatrice nodded, her expression betraying relief beneath the triumph. "Thank you. I'll be here at 6. As she stood to leave, she finally noticed Archer watching her. Their eyes met briefly and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. Then she was gone, the saloon doors swinging behind her. "Never thought I'd see the day Jenkins hired an expecting woman to play piano," remarked the man next to Archer. "This town's changing." "Everything changes," Archer replied, finishing his coffee and leaving money on the bar. "Doesn't mean it's for the better." He completed his business in town quickly, posting notices for new ranch hands and purchasing supplies. As he was loading the last of his provisions onto his pack horse, he spotted Beatrice emerging from the general store, struggling with several packages. Against his better judgment, he approached her. "Need a hand, Mrs. Gray?" She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Thank you, Mr. Landry, Archer Landry. You're the one from the Diamondback Ranch," she said, recognition dawning. "I heard about the attack last night. Is everyone all right?" "One of my men took a bullet, but he'll live," Archer replied, taking the packages from her arms, despite her initial protest. "Where are you staying?" "I've taken a room at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, just down the street." They walked in awkward silence for a moment, before Beatrice spoke again. "I suppose you're wondering about my situation." "None of my business," Archer said shortly. "No, it isn't," she agreed, surprising him with a small smile. "But people will talk anyway, so you might as well hear the truth from me. My husband died 4 months ago in Chicago. Consumption. I came west because I needed to start somewhere new, somewhere I could support myself and my child." Archer nodded, unsure how to respond. Her direct manner was disconcerting. "Scottsbluff's a hard place for a woman alone." "So is Chicago," she replied simply. "At least here. I won't have my in-laws trying to take my child because they believe an unmarried widow can't possibly raise it properly." They reached the boarding house, and Archer handed her packages back. "Well, good luck, Mrs. Gray. Thank you, Mr. Landry, for the help and for not offering me your pity. That's refreshingly rare." As she disappeared into the boarding house, Archer found himself strangely affected by the brief encounter. There was something about Beatrice Gray that stirred memories he'd long tried to bury of a time before the war, before he'd learned how cruel the world could truly be. Shaking off the unwelcome thoughts, he mounted Thunder and headed back to the ranch. He had rustlers to worry about, not some stubborn widow with wheat-colored eyes. The next few weeks brought increasing tension to the region. The Blackwater Gang struck 3 more ranches, growing bolder with each raid. Archer hired 5 additional hands, all veterans like himself, men who knew how to fight and wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger when necessary. The ranch took on the atmosphere of a military camp, with regular patrols and strategic defenses. Despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, Archer found himself riding into Scottsbluff more frequently than usual. He told himself it was for supplies, for information, for coordination with other ranchers. But each time, his steps inevitably led him to the Rusty Nail in the evenings, where Beatrice Gray played the piano with a skill that transformed the rough saloon into something almost refined. He never approached her directly, choosing instead to nurse a whiskey at a corner table, watching as she skillfully handled both the piano and the occasionally rowdy patrons with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. Her pregnancy was advancing, But she never missed a night, playing through obvious discomfort with unwavering determination. One evening in late June, as a summer storm pounded the town with sheets of rain, Archer entered the saloon to find it unusually crowded. Men from outlying ranches had come to town for a meeting about the rustling situation and were now seeking shelter from the downpour. The atmosphere was tense, the alcohol flowing freely as ranchers exchanged stories of losses and close calls. Beatrice was at the piano, playing lively tunes that seemed at odds with the grim mood. Archer took his usual corner table, nodding to acquaintances but avoiding deeper conversation. He was tired, having spent the day reinforcing fences and moving cattle to more secure pastures. He was on his second whiskey when he noticed a group of rough-looking men enter. They weren't locals, and something about their watchful eyes and the way they positioned themselves around the room set Archer's nerves on edge. One man, tall with a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw, surveyed the crowd before his gaze settled on Beatrice. The scarred man sauntered toward the piano, leaning against it with deliberate casualness. "Play something sweeter, honey," he called out, dropping a coin onto the piano top. "Something a man can dream to." Beatrice nodded politely and smoothly transitioned to a softer melody. The man watched her intently, his eyes traveling from her face to her swollen belly and back again. "What's a pretty thing like you doing in a place like this?" he asked, his voice carrying in a momentary lull in conversation. "Especially in your condition?" "Earning a living, sir," Beatrice replied evenly, never missing a note. "Just like everyone else." The man's companions had moved closer, forming a loose circle around the piano. Archer set down his glass slowly, watching the scene unfold. "A woman in your condition should have a man taking care of her," the scarred man continued, reaching out to touch a lock of Beatrice's hair that had escaped her simple bun. She jerked away from his touch, her fingers faltering on the keys for the first time. "Please don't do that." The scarred man's expression hardened. "Not very friendly, are you? After I paid for a special song and everything." "I played your song," Beatrice said, her voice steady despite the fear Archer could see in her eyes. "Now, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me continue my work." "Your work," the man repeated with a cruel laugh. "Is that what you call it? Seems to me you've been doing other kinds of work, too." He gestured crudely at her belly. The saloon had gone silent, the tension palpable. Jenkins, the owner, moved toward the piano, but one of the scarred man's companions intercepted him, a hand resting meaningfully on his gun. That was enough for Archer. He stood and crossed the room, his spurs jingling in the silence. "The lady asked you to leave her alone," he said quietly, positioning himself between Beatrice and the scarred man. The man's eyes narrowed. "This isn't your business, cowboy." "I'm making it my business," Archer replied, his hand hovering near his holster. "You and your friends need to move along." The scarred man sized Archer up, noting the confident stance and the weathered gun belt that spoke of frequent use. After a tense moment, he smiled a cold, calculating expression. "Sure thing, friend. No harm meant." He stepped back, gesturing to his companions. "Let's go, boys. Plenty of other saloons in this town." As they moved toward the door, the scarred man paused beside Archer. "I know you," he said softly. "Diamondback Ranch, right? Heard you've been having some trouble with rustlers lately. Shame about that." The implied threat hung in the air as the men exited, leaving the saloon in uneasy silence. Slowly, conversations resumed, though with a forced quality that betrayed the lingering tension. Archer turned to Beatrice, who was sitting very still at the piano, her hands resting in her lap. "Are you all right, Mrs. Gray?" She nodded, though her face was pale. "Yes, thank you." "You recognize those men?" Archer asked, his voice low. "No," she replied. "But I've seen their type before." Jenkins approached, wiping nervous hands on his apron. "Mrs. Gray, perhaps you should call it a night. Those fellas might come back, and I don't want any trouble." Beatrice looked up sharply. "Are you dismissing me, Mr. Jenkins?" "No, no," the saloon owner hastened to assure her. "Just for tonight, for your own safety." "I need tonight's wages," she said simply. "I can't afford to lose them." "You'll get paid for the full night," Archer found himself saying. "I'll cover it." Both Beatrice and Jenkins looked at him in surprise. Before either could respond, the saloon doors burst open again. This time, It was Sheriff Daniels, soaking wet and breathing hard. "Landry!" he called out. "Just got word rustlers hit the Montgomery place. They're headed south, right toward your ranch." Archer was moving before the sheriff finished speaking, pausing only to look back at Beatrice. "Stay inside tonight. Don't go back to the boarding house alone." Without waiting for her response, he rushed out into the pouring rain, mounted thunder, and galloped out of town, dread building with each pounding hoofbeat. He pushed the stallion hard, covering the 10 miles to Diamondback in record time, despite the treacherous conditions. As he crested the final hill, his worst fears were confirmed. The western pasture was ablaze despite the rain, fire licking at the night sky. Gunshots echoed across the property as his men defended the ranch house and main barn. Cattle scattered in panic, their silhouettes visible against the flames. Archer rode straight into the chaos. Drawing his rifle and firing at shadowy figures moving among the cattle, he recognized the scarred man from the saloon leading the attack, confirming what he'd already suspected. These weren't just any rustlers. This was the Blackwater Gang, and the encounter in town had been no coincidence. The battle lasted for hours, the rain eventually helping to extinguish the fires but making the ground treacherous and visibility poor. By dawn, the attackers had been driven off, but the cost was high. 2 of Archer's men were dead, another gravely wounded. Nearly 100 head of cattle had been stolen, with dozens more scattered across the countryside. As Archer helped tend to the wounded man, his foreman Elijah approached, his face grim beneath a layer of soot and blood. "They knew exactly when to hit us, boss," he said quietly. "Like they knew most of us would be at that meeting in town." Archer nodded, his jaw clenched in fury. "It wasn't random. I encountered their scout in the saloon earlier. He recognized me." "This is getting beyond what we can handle," Elijah warned. "These aren't just rustlers, they're an army." "Then we'll be a better one," Archer replied, standing to survey the damage in the gray light of dawn. "We'll recover what we can today, bury our dead, and then I'm riding to Omaha. It's time the territorial marshal got involved, whether he wants to or not." For 3 days, they worked to restore order to the ranch. The remaining cattle were rounded up, the dead were buried with simple ceremony, and defenses were reinforced. On the 4th morning, Archer prepared to ride to Omaha, leaving Elijah in charge. "Should be back within 10 days, he told his foreman. "Sooner, if I can manage it. If the Blackwater Gang returns before then, we'll be ready," Elijah promised grimly. "Just get us some real help, boss." As Archer rode through Scottsbluff on his way east, he found himself detouring past Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. He hadn't returned to town since the night of the attack, and something compelled him to check on Beatrice before his journey. Mrs. Peterson answered his knock, her plump face registering surprise at seeing the notorious Archer Landry on her doorstep. "Mr. Landry, what can I do for you?" "I was hoping to speak with Mrs. Gray briefly," he said, removing his hat. "Is she available?" The landlady's expression shifted to concern. "Oh dear, haven't you heard? Mrs. Gray took ill 2 days ago. The doctor's been by twice already." Alarm shot through Archer. "What happened? Is it serious?" "The doctor says it's just exhaustion and the heat, but—" Mrs. Peterson leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Between us, I think the poor dear's been working too hard in her condition. She collapsed right at that piano in the Rusty Nail. If you ask me, Jenkins should never have hired her in the first place." "May I see her?" Archer asked, surprising himself with the request. Mrs. Peterson hesitated, then nodded. "She's awake now. 2nd floor, last door on the right. But only for a few minutes, mind you. She needs her rest." Archer climbed the narrow stairs, feeling strangely nervous. He'd faced down armed men without flinching, yet the prospect of this visit unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. He knocked softly on the indicated door. "Come in," Beatrice called, her voice weaker than he remembered. He entered to find her propped up in bed, her honey blonde hair loose around her shoulders, her face pale but composed. She blinked in surprise at seeing him. "Mr. Landry," she said, attempting to sit up straighter. "Please, don't get up," he said quickly, remaining by the door, hat in hand. "I heard you were unwell. I'm on my way to Omaha and wanted to check on you." A faint smile touched her lips. "That's very kind. I'm much better today. The doctor says it was just overexertion." Archer nodded awkwardly, suddenly unsure why he'd come. Good. That's good. Beatrice studied him, her wheat-colored eyes perceptive. I heard about your ranch. I'm sorry for your losses. We've weathered worse, he replied automatically. Though in truth, the Blackwater attack ranked among the most devastating he'd experienced. Will you rebuild? Already started. I'm heading to Omaha to demand the territorial marshal send men to deal with the Blackwater Gang. Beatrice nodded, then winced slightly, her hand moving to her belly. Archer took an involuntary step forward before catching himself. Are you all right? Yes, she assured him with a small smile. The baby is just very active today. Would you like to feel it? The question caught him completely off guard. I don't think... It's all right, she said quickly, a flush coloring her pale cheeks. That was presumptuous of me. No, it's... Archer hesitated, then moved closer to the bed. I've never felt a baby kick before. Beatrice took his rough, calloused hand and placed it gently on the swell of her belly. For a moment, there was nothing, and then a distinct movement against his palm, followed by another, stronger one. The sensation was so foreign, so miraculous, that Archer found himself momentarily speechless. That's something, he finally managed, withdrawing his hand reluctantly. Yes, it is, Beatrice agreed, her eyes meeting his with unexpected warmth. Life finding a way, despite everything? Something shifted in Archer's chest, an unfamiliar feeling he couldn't name. He stepped back, suddenly needing distance. I should go. The journey to Omaha is long, and I want to make good time. Of course, she said, her expression unreadable. Thank you for checking on me, Mr. Landry, and be careful. The Blackwater Gang clearly has a grudge against you now. I can handle them, he replied with more confidence than he felt. At the door he paused. Mrs. Gray, Beatrice, when do you expect? He gestured vaguely toward her belly. Early September, according to the doctor, she answered. Though first babies often come late, I'm told. Archer nodded. I should be back well before then. If you need anything while I'm gone, I'll be fine, she assured him gently. I've been taking care of myself for some time now. With a final nod, Archer left, his thoughts in unexpected turmoil as he rode east toward Omaha. The memory of the baby's kick against his palm lingered, as did the image of Beatrice's wheat-colored eyes watching him with that mix of vulnerability and strength. For the first time in years, Archer Landry found himself thinking about a future beyond the next cattle drive or the next gunfight. It was a dangerous distraction he couldn't afford, not with the Blackwater Gang still threatening everything he'd built. He pushed the thoughts away, focusing instead on the long journey ahead and the justice he sought. Little did he know that fate had already set in motion events that would change his life forever. Archer's journey to Omaha proved longer and more frustrating than anticipated. Summer storms washed out bridges and turned roads into mud pits, slowing his progress. When he finally reached the territorial capital, he discovered the marshal was away investigating a bank robbery in Wyoming and wouldn't return for at least a week. Unwilling to wait, Archer left detailed reports with the deputy marshal, securing a promise that a force would be dispatched to Scottsbluff as soon as possible. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best he could achieve without further delay. The return journey was equally challenging. By the time he reached the outskirts of Scottsbluff in late July, nearly 3 weeks had passed since he'd left. As he rode down the main street, he noted with relief that the town appeared peaceful. Perhaps the Blackwater Gang had moved on to easier targets. His first stop was the sheriff's office, where he found Daniels looking more haggard than when he'd left. Landry, the sheriff greeted him with obvious relief. Glad you're back. Got some news about Blackwater? They hit again? Archer asked grimly. No, actually. Word is they've pulled back to Wyoming for now. Rumor has it their leader, James Blackwater himself, got wounded in a failed raid near Cheyenne. That was unexpected good news. Any idea how long they'll stay away? No telling, but I'd use the breathing room to prepare. They're not known for forgetting grudges. The sheriff hesitated. There's something else you should know. That woman from the saloon, Mrs. Gray. Archer felt a sudden tightness in his chest. What about her? She's been asking about you. Came by several times wondering if I'd had word of when you'd return. This was surprising. Did she say why? No, Daniels replied, watching Archer curiously. But she seemed concerned. She's still at the boarding house, far as I know. Archer nodded, trying to appear merely politely interested. I'll check in with her. She was unwell when I left. The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly, but he made no comment. After reporting what little he'd accomplished in Omaha, Archer headed to Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. He found the landlady in the garden, pinning sheets to a clothesline. Mr. Landry, she greeted him with a knowing smile that made him distinctly uncomfortable. Back from Omaha, I see. Mrs. Gray will be pleased. Is she improved? He asked, ignoring the insinuation. Much better, Mrs. Peterson replied. Back working at the saloon, though only 4 nights a week now, thank goodness. Doctor's orders. She's not there now, should be upstairs. Archer thanked her and entered the boarding house, climbing the now familiar stairs. He knocked on Beatrice's door, suddenly aware that his heart was beating faster than the situation warranted. When she opened the door, he was struck by how much her pregnancy had advanced in his absence. Her belly was prominently rounded now, straining against the simple blue dress she wore. Despite this, she looked healthier than when he'd left, her cheeks flushed with color, her wheat blonde hair neatly arranged. Mr. Landry, she said, genuine pleasure lighting her eyes. You're back. Please come in. He entered the small room, which was neat and modestly furnished. A vase of wildflowers brightened the windowsill, and a small stack of books sat beside the bed. Sheriff Daniels mentioned you'd been asking after me, he said, getting straight to the point. Beatrice nodded, gesturing for him to sit in the room's only chair while she perched on the edge of the bed. Yes, I was worried. There were rumors the Blackwater Gang was specifically targeting you, and when weeks passed with no word, the journey took longer than expected, he explained, surprised and oddly touched by her concern. Roads were washed out, and the marshal was away when I arrived. But you're unharmed, she stated, her eyes quickly assessing him for injury. I am, and you seem much improved. Yes, the doctor insists I rest more than I'd like, but I've felt the baby grow stronger each day. She smiled, then grew serious. Actually, I'm glad you're here. There's something I wanted to discuss with you. Archer tensed instinctively. In his experience, such statements rarely preceded good news. What is it? Beatrice took a deep breath. I've received a letter from my late husband's parents in Chicago. They've made certain offers. What kind of offers? Financial support, she replied, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. On the condition that I return to Chicago and allow them to guide the upbringing of their grandchild? Archer frowned. You said before they wanted to take the child from you. They've moderated their position somewhat, Beatrice said with a hint of bitterness. Now they merely want to control us both. They're wealthy, influential people who believe they know what's best for everyone. And what do you want? She looked up, her gaze direct and unwavering. Freedom, independence, the chance to build a life on my own terms. She paused. But I'm not a fool. This child deserves security, opportunities. Sometimes I wonder if my pride is standing in the way of what would be best. Archer considered her words carefully. From what little I know of you, Mrs. Gray, your decisions seem guided by more than pride. You came west alone, found employment, established yourself all while carrying a child. That speaks to courage and determination, not pride. Her eyes softened with gratitude. Thank you. That's kind of you to say. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things unsaid. Archer stood, suddenly aware he'd overstayed the brief visit he'd intended. I should go. I need to check on the ranch, see how things have fared in my absence. Of course, Beatrice said, rising as well. I'm glad you came by, Mr. Landry. At the door, he paused. The sheriff says Blackwater's gang has withdrawn to Wyoming for now, but they'll be back. Be careful. I will, she promised. And you do the same. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, before Archer nodded and left. As he rode toward Diamondback Ranch, he found himself mulling over their conversation. Why had she shared such personal matters with him, essentially a stranger? And why did he care so much about her decision? These unanswerable questions accompanied him home, where he found the ranch operational, but tense. Elijah had maintained order in his absence, hiring 3 new hands to replace the men they'd lost and reinforcing security measures. The cattle were grazing peacefully, though their numbers were noticeably diminished from before the attack. Over the next 2 weeks, Archer threw himself into ranch work, overseeing repairs to damaged buildings, and joining the hands in moving cattle to fresh pastures. The physical labor helped quiet his mind, though thoughts of Beatrice Gray continued to surface at unexpected moments. He avoided town, sending Elijah or other hands for supplies. This strategy worked until early August, when Elijah returned from a supply run with news that couldn't be ignored. "Boss," his foreman said, finding Archer mending a fence in the north pasture. "Got some troubling news from town. Blackwater Gang's been spotted near the Wyoming border, moving this way. And there's more, seems they've joined forces with the Hatcher brothers." Archer cursed under his breath. The Hatcher brothers were notorious outlaws in their own right, specializing in the terror tactics and revenge killings. "How far out are they?" "Sheriff thinks maybe 3 days, if they're coming straight here. Could be longer if they hit other places first." Archer drove the hammer into his belt and wiped sweat from his brow. "Gather the men. We need to prepare." For the next 2 days, Diamondback Ranch transformed into a fortress. Barricades were constructed, weapons cleaned and loaded, watch points established. Archer sent the youngest hands to escort the most valuable breeding stock to a hidden valley in the hills, while the remaining cattle were consolidated in pastures that could be more easily defended. On the 3rd day, when Blackwater still hadn't appeared, Archer made a decision. He needed to warn Beatrice. If the gang held a grudge against him, they might target anyone associated with him, and she had been seen publicly in his company. He rode into Scottsbluff that afternoon, the town unusually quiet as word of the approaching danger spread. The sheriff's office was bustling with activity as Daniels deputized volunteers and distributed ammunition. "Landry," Daniels acknowledged grimly as Archer entered. "Just about to send someone to your place. Got confirmation Blackwater and the Hatchers crossed into Nebraska yesterday. Raided a farm about 30 miles west. Left no survivors." "Women and children?" Archer asked, his jaw tightening. Daniels nodded grimly. "Everyone, they're sending a message." "I'm here to take Mrs. Gray back to the ranch," Archer said without preamble. "She could be a target because of me." If the sheriff was surprised by this declaration, he hit it well. "Probably wise. Most of the women and children in town are gathering at the church tonight. Reverend Wilson's opened the basement as a shelter." "She'll be safer at Diamondback," Archer insisted. "We're better armed, and I have men who know how to fight." "Your choice," Daniels replied. "But hurry. I'm ordering the town locked down at sundown." Archer strode quickly to the boarding house, relief washing over him when he found Beatrice in her room, packing a small valise. "You've heard," he said, taking in the scene. She nodded, her face pale but composed. "Mrs. Peterson said everyone's to gather at the church tonight." "I've come to take you to my ranch," Archer stated plainly. "It's fortified, well defended, safer than the church." Beatrice looked at him in surprise. "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose—" "It's not kindness," he interrupted. "It's practicality. Blackwater might target you to get to me. I won't have that on my conscience." She studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. I'll need a few minutes to finish packing." "Pack light. We need to ride fast." While she gathered her things, Archer spoke briefly with Mrs. Peterson, ensuring she understood the seriousness of the situation and was planning to join the others at the church. Then he helped Beatrice down to the street, where Thunder waited impatiently. "I've never ridden astride," she admitted, eyeing the horse with trepidation. "You'll sit in front of me," Archer explained, taking her valise and securing it to the saddle. "I'll keep you steady." With some awkwardness due to her advanced pregnancy, he helped her onto the horse, then mounted behind her. The position was intimate by necessity, his arms around her to hold the reins, her back pressed against his chest. He could smell the faint lavender scent of her hair, feel the tension in her shoulders. "Ready?" he asked, his voice rough. She nodded, and he urged Thunder into a canter, moving swiftly through town and onto the open road toward Diamondback. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and he could feel Beatrice growing tired as they rode, though she made no complaint. They were halfway to the ranch when Archer spotted a dust cloud on the horizon behind them, riders moving fast. His heart raced as he urged Thunder to greater speed, but with 2 riders, the stallion couldn't maintain the pace needed to outrun pursuers. "We've got company," he told Beatrice grimly. "Hold tight." He veered off the main trail into a stand of cottonwoods that followed a shallow creek. The trees provided some cover as they splashed through the water, but Archer knew it was only a temporary solution. The riders behind them would easily follow their tracks. "There's a place up ahead," he said into Beatrice's ear. "An old trapper's cabin. We might be able to defend it until nightfall, then slip away in the dark." She nodded, her body tense against his. "How many are following us?" "Can't tell yet. Maybe 4 or 5. The abandoned cabin came into view, a small, dilapidated structure nestled against a rocky hillside. It wasn't much, but the stone chimney and thick walls would provide better protection than open ground. Archer urged Thunder toward it, his eyes constantly scanning for any movement around them. They reached the cabin just as the sound of hoofbeats grew audible behind them. Archer dismounted quickly, then helped Beatrice down, wincing at her gasp of discomfort as her feet hit the ground. "Inside," he ordered, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "Stay low and away from the windows." She obeyed without question, moving as quickly as her condition allowed. Archer led Thunder around to the back of the cabin, tethering him where the horse would have some protection from gunfire. Then he circled the small structure, assessing sight lines and potential weaknesses. The cabin had just 2 small windows and a single door. The roof was partially collapsed at one corner, but the remaining walls were solid. It wasn't ideal, but it was defensible. Archer slipped inside, finding Beatrice crouched in a corner away from the windows as instructed. Her face was pale with fear, but her eyes were clear and focused. "They're still coming," he told her, checking his ammunition. 5 riders, heavily armed. "Blackwater?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady. "Can't tell yet, but they're not friendly, whoever they are." He moved to a window, staying to the side as he peered out. The riders had slowed, approaching cautiously now that their quarry had gone to ground. Archer recognized the scarred man from the saloon leading them. Definitely Blackwater Gang. "I count 5, he told Beatrice. "They'll probably try to surround us." As if confirming his assessment, the riders split up, 2 circling toward the back of the cabin, while 3 remained in front. Archer moved quickly to the rear window, his mind racing through options, none of them good. Even with his skill, the odds of successfully defending against 5 determined attackers were slim, especially with Beatrice to protect. A voice called out from outside. "Landry, we know you're in there. Send out the woman, and maybe we'll let you live." "That's generous of you," Archer called back sarcastically. "What does Blackwater want with a pregnant piano player?" "Insurance," came the reply. "You've caused us enough trouble. The boss wants to make sure you behave while we finish our business in these parts." Archer glanced at Beatrice, whose hand had moved protectively to her belly. "Not going to happen," he shouted. "Why don't you boys move along while you still can?" A bullet splintered the wooden frame of the window in response, sending Archer ducking for cover. "So much for negotiation," he muttered. "What do we do?" Beatrice asked, her voice tight with fear but still controlled. Archer checked his watch. It was just past 4 in the afternoon. "We hold them off until dark. My men will come looking when we don't return to the ranch." "And if they rush us before then?" He met her eyes steadily. "Then I'll do everything I can to protect you, I promise." The sincerity in his voice seemed to reassure her. She nodded, then reached into her boot and withdrew a small derringer. "I can help. I know how to use this." Archer raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Your husband teach you?" "No," she replied with a hint of a smile despite the circumstances. "My father. He believed a woman should know how to defend herself." "Smart man," Archer commented, genuinely impressed. "But save that as a last resort. It won't do much against rifles at a distance." For the next hour, they settled into a tense standoff. The Blackwater men fired occasional shots at the cabin, testing Archer's patience and ammunition. He responded sparingly, making each shot count, managing to wound one of the attackers who grew careless and exposed himself too long. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Archer sensed a change in the outlaws' tactics. They were moving closer, using the lengthening shadows for cover. An assault was coming. "They're going to rush us soon," he told Beatrice, who had remained remarkably calm throughout the ordeal. "When they do, I want you to stay in this corner, as low as possible." She nodded, then gasped suddenly, her hand going to her belly. "What is it?" Archer asked, alarmed. "Nothing," she assured him quickly. "The baby is just very active. The excitement, I suppose." He wasn't entirely convinced, but had no time to press the issue as a barrage of gunfire erupted from outside, peppering the cabin from multiple directions. Using the covering fire, two of the attackers made a dash for the door. Archer was ready. He fired twice in rapid succession, dropping one man immediately. The other reached the porch before Archer's third shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him away from the door with a howl of pain. The remaining outlaws intensified their fire, keeping Archer pinned down as they adjusted their strategy. Through a gap in the wall, he could see them conferring, the scarred leader gesturing angrily. "They're preparing something," he warned Beatrice. "Stay down." Moments later, a flaming torch arced through the air, landing on the already damaged portion of the roof. The dry wood caught immediately, smoke beginning to fill the cabin. "They're trying to smoke us out," Archer growled, moving to the door. "We can't stay here." "But we can't leave either," Beatrice pointed out, her voice strained. She coughed as smoke swirled around them. "They're just waiting for us to run." Archer's mind raced, calculating distances and angles. Behind the cabin, the hillside rose steeply, covered with boulders and scrub pine. If they could reach it without being seen, they might be able to find cover and work their way around to where Thunder was tethered. "There's a back way," he said, moving to her side and helping her up. "Through that collapsed section. The smoke will help hide us if we're quick." Beatrice nodded, but as she stood, she doubled over with a sharp intake of breath. This time, there was no mistaking it for mere discomfort. "What's wrong?" Archer demanded, supporting her weight as she clutched his arm. I think the baby is coming," she gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "It's too early, but the stress—" Archer felt a cold dread sweep through him. This complicated an already desperate situation beyond measure. "Are you sure?" Another spasm gripped her, and she nodded wordlessly, her face contorted in pain. "All right," he said, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Change of plan. We still need to get out of here, but we'll have to find somewhere safe for you." The fire was spreading rapidly now, the smoke thickening. Outside, the outlaws were growing bolder, sensing their advantage. Archer made a swift decision. "I'm going to create a diversion," he told Beatrice. "When I do, I need you to move as quickly as you can toward those rocks behind the cabin. Can you do that?" She straightened with visible effort, determination replacing fear in her eyes. "Yes, I can do it." "Good. Wait for my signal." He moved to the front window, took careful aim at the nearest outlaw, and fired. The man fell with a cry, creating momentary confusion among his companions. Archer used the opportunity to discharge his remaining rounds in quick succession, forcing the attackers to seek cover. "Now!" he shouted, helping Beatrice toward the collapsed section of roof. The smoke provided some concealment as they stumbled through the burning timbers and into the fading daylight. Hunched low, they made for the rocky hillside, Archer supporting Beatrice as best he could, while keeping his empty rifle ready as a bluff. They had almost reached the first large boulders when a shout went up from behind them. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around them as they scrambled for cover. Archer reloaded quickly, returning fire to slow the pursuit. "Keep going," he urged Beatrice, who was breathing heavily. One hand braced against a boulder for support. "There's a small cave up ahead. I've used it before during storms." She nodded wordlessly, her face pale with pain and exertion. They moved from boulder to boulder, the gunfire behind them growing more sporadic as darkness fell and their pursuers lost clear targets. The small cave mouth appeared ahead, barely visible in the gathering gloom. It was little more than a deep overhang in the hillside, but it would provide shelter and concealment. Archer helped Beatrice inside, then positioned himself at the entrance, listening intently. The sounds of pursuit had receded, but he knew the Blackwater men wouldn't give up easily. Inside the shallow cave, Beatrice sank to the ground with a stifled moan, her arms wrapped around her belly. "How bad is it?" Archer asked quietly, kneeling beside her. "The pains are coming faster," she whispered, her face damp with perspiration. "I don't know how much time we have." Archer ran a hand through his hair, confronting a situation far outside his experience. "I'll need to go back for Thunder. We might still be able to reach the ranch if the outlaws give up the search." Beatrice caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't leave me," she pleaded. "Not yet. The baby, I don't think I can wait." The fear in her eyes pierced him more deeply than any bullet could have. "I don't know anything about delivering babies," he admitted, his voice rough with helpless frustration. "Neither do I," she replied with a weak attempt at a smile. "But women have been doing this since the beginning of time, often without help. We'll manage." "We have to." A peculiar calm settled over Archer as he accepted the inevitable. They were trapped on this hillside, pursued by killers, with a baby determined to enter the world at the worst possible moment. Yet, somehow, looking at Beatrice's resolute face in the dim light, he felt a strange certainty that they would survive this. "All right," he said, squeezing her hand. "Tell me what you need me to do." For the next hour, as night fully descended, Archer alternated between watching for pursuers and helping Beatrice prepare for the birth as best they could. He sacrificed his shirt to provide clean cloths, used his canteen to wash her face when the pains grew intense, and held her hand through each contraction. The irony wasn't lost on him that he, Archer Landry, who had spent years avoiding attachments and responsibilities, was now the sole support for a woman bringing new life into the world. As Beatrice's labor intensified, Archer grew increasingly concerned about the Blackwater men. The pursuit had gone quiet, but that could mean they were regrouping or setting an ambush. Either way, the longer they remained in the cave, the greater the danger. During a brief respite between contractions, Archer moved to the cave entrance, scanning the darkened landscape. In the distance, he could see the cabin still burning, orange flames illuminating the night. But of their pursuers, there was no sign. "I think they're waiting for daylight," he told Beatrice, returning to her side. "How are you holding up?" "The baby's coming soon," she gasped, her face strained with effort. "Very soon, I can feel it." Archer knelt beside her, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "You're doing great. Just tell me what you need." "Stay with me," she whispered, gripping his hand as another contraction began. "Just stay." The next hour passed in a blur of intensity as Beatrice's labor reached its climax. Archer followed her urgent instructions, supporting her as she pushed, wiping her brow, offering what comfort he could with his presence and words. And then, incredibly, impossibly, a new cry pierced the night, thin and indignant, but unmistakably alive. A tiny, perfect being emerged into Archer's waiting hands, slippery and warm and miraculous. "It's a boy," he said, his voice breaking with emotion he couldn't name. A perfect little boy. With trembling hands, he cleaned the infant with the remaining scraps of his shirt, then carefully placed the child on Beatrice's chest. She looked down at her son with wonder, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little one," she whispered, cradling him close. "You certainly know how to make an entrance." Archer watched them, a strange tightness in his chest. He'd witnessed birth before on the ranch calves and foals entering the world, with similar drama and messiness. But this was entirely different. This tiny human, blinking up at the world with unfocused eyes, had changed something fundamental in him with his very existence. "Thank you," Beatrice said, looking up at Archer with exhausted gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have," he replied honestly. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met." She smiled tiredly, then looked down at her son again. "He needs a name. Do you have one in mind?" "I had thought to name him after his father," she said softly. "But now I think he should have his own name, a fresh start." She studied the tiny face for a moment. "Matthew, it means gift of God." Archer tensed at the reference to deity, his old resistance flaring briefly. But looking at the miraculous new life before him, he found he couldn't muster his usual cynicism. "Matthew?" he repeated, trying the name. "It suits him." Beatrice's eyes met his, a question in their wheat-colored depths. "Would you like to hold him?" Archer hesitated, suddenly aware of his rough hands, calloused from years of ranch work and gunfighting. "I don't think—" "Please," she interrupted gently. "I'd like you to." With careful movements, she transferred the swaddled infant to his arms. Archer held the tiny bundle awkwardly at first, terrified of causing harm. But as the baby settled against his chest, something profound shifted within him. Matthew's eyes opened briefly, unfocused yet somehow seeming to look directly at him. A tiny hand escaped the improvised swaddling, 5 perfect fingers splaying against Archer's weathered skin. The contrast was stark new life, against hands that had dealt death too many times to count. In that moment, cradling this child born amid danger and fear, Archer felt something he had long believed dead within him: hope. Not just for survival until morning, but for something larger, something he had no name for yet. "He's amazing," Archer whispered, unable to tear his gaze from the infant's face. "Perfect." "Yes," Beatrice agreed softly. "He is." The distant sound of a gunshot shattered the moment. Archer carefully returned Matthew to his mother's arms and moved to the cave entrance, his expression hardening as he was pulled back to their dangerous reality. "They're still out there," he said grimly, "and we need to move before dawn. Can you travel?" Beatrice looked doubtful. "I don't know. Perhaps with help." Archer made a swift decision. "I'm going to retrieve Thunder. With any luck, the outlaws are focused on the burning cabin, thinking we're still inside. You and Matthew stay here, keep absolutely quiet. I'll be back as soon as I can." She nodded, her arms tightening protectively around her son. "Be careful." "Always am," he replied with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. As he prepared to leave, he paused, looking back at mother and child. "What happened here tonight? I won't forget it." Before she could respond, he slipped out into the darkness, moving silently among the boulders. The night was cool and clear, stars spread across the sky in a brilliant display that seemed to mock their desperate situation. The burning cabin was now just a smoldering ruin, but Archer could make out shapes moving around it, the Blackwater men, still searching. Using the skills honed through years on the frontier, he made his way down the hillside, keeping to shadows and natural cover. Thunder was where he had left him, tethered behind what remained of the cabin, thankfully unharmed and unnoticed by the outlaws. Archer approached cautiously, aware that the slightest sound could alert the searchers. He could hear them now, arguing among themselves. "I'm telling you, they're either burned up in there or long gone," one man was saying. "The boss said no one leaves until we're sure," the scarred leader replied. "At first light, we search the hills. If they're out there, we'll find them." Archer's jaw tightened. Dawn was only a few hours away. He needed to get Beatrice and Matthew to safety before then. With infinite care, he untied Thunder and led the horse away from the cabin, moving slowly to minimize noise. Only when they were well clear of the searchers did he mount up, urging the stallion back toward the hillside and the cave where new life waited. The journey back seemed to take an eternity, each step fraught with the risk of discovery. When he finally reached the cave, he found Beatrice sitting up, Matthew sleeping peacefully in her arms. "You made it," she whispered, visible relief washing over her face. "Can you stand?" he asked, helping her to her feet. She was unsteady but determined, leaning heavily on his arm. "I can try," she said. For Matthew, with painstaking care, Archer helped her from the cave and onto Thunder. It was an awkward arrangement, with Beatrice cradling Matthew in one arm while Archer supported them both from behind. But it was the best they could manage. "We'll head north," he said quietly as they began to move. "Circle back to the ranch. It's a longer route but safer." For hours they traveled slowly through the darkness, Archer constantly alert for signs of pursuit. Beatrice remained silent, except for occasional gasps when the horse's movement caused her pain. Matthew miraculously slept through most of the journey, waking only once with a cry that Archer quickly muffled against his chest. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the northern boundary of Diamondback Ranch. Archer felt Beatrice sagging against him, her strength clearly fading. "Not much farther?" he encouraged her. "You're doing great." "I'm trying," she whispered. "For him." They were spotted by one of Archer's hands as they approached the ranch house, and soon Elijah was running to meet them, rifle ready, face creased with worry. "Boss, we've been searching all night. When you didn't return..." He stopped short, taking in the scene before him, his employer supporting an exhausted woman and a newborn infant. "What in the name of..." "Later," Archer cut him off. "Mrs. Gray needs medical attention, and the Blackwater Gang is likely on our trail." Elijah snapped into action, helping Beatrice down from Thunder while shouting orders to the gathering ranch hands. Within minutes, Beatrice and Matthew were settled in Archer's own bedroom, the ranch's cook, who had experience as a midwife, attending to them while men took up defensive positions around the property. Archer gave Elijah a brief account of what had happened, emphasizing the likelihood of an attack. "We're ready for them," his foreman assured him. "Been preparing since you left. Got 20 men armed and positioned, plus those Winchesters you ordered from Omaha arrived yesterday." Archer nodded, some tension easing from his shoulders. "Good. Double the guards anyway. I'm going to check on Mrs. Gray and the baby." "Boss," Elijah said, a knowing look in his eyes. "That her baby or—" "Hers," Archer replied firmly. "Her late husband's child. She was a widow before she came to Scottsbluff." Elijah nodded, though his expression remained speculative. "She seems like a fine woman." "She is?" Archer agreed simply, turning toward the house. He found Beatrice propped up in his bed, looking pale but composed. Matthew was swaddled properly now, sleeping in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a dresser drawer. Mrs. Hollister, the cook, was just leaving the room with a basin of water. "She needs rest," the older woman told Archer in a low voice. "That was a hard birth in impossible conditions. But they're both strong. They'll be fine with proper care." Archer thanked her, then entered the room quietly, not wanting to disturb the sleeping infant. Beatrice's eyes opened as he approached. "How are you feeling?" he asked awkwardly. "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," she replied with a weak smile. "But alive, thanks to you." Archer shook his head. "You did all the hard work. I just helped." Her gaze softened. "You did more than that. You saved us both." He moved to the window, checking the perimeter out of habit. The ranch was secure, men visible at various defensive positions. No sign yet of the Blackwater Gang. "We should be safe here," he told her. "My men are well armed and prepared." "And after?" Beatrice asked quietly. "What happens when the danger passes?" Archer turned back to her, struck by the vulnerability in her question. "That's for you to decide. You and Matthew are welcome to stay here as long as you need, until you're strong enough to travel at least." "Travel where?" she wondered, more to herself than to him. "I have no home, no family except for in-laws who see me as nothing but an inconvenience." Archer found himself saying words he hadn't planned. "You have a place here if you want it. Scottsbluff, I mean. People respect you, and the baby— well, babies have a way of making their own welcome." Beatrice studied him for a long moment. "And what about you, Mr. Landry? Where do you fit in all of this?" "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "I've never been good with attachments, but last night, when I held Matthew—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the profound shift he'd experienced. "Change things?" she suggested softly. "Maybe. Yes." He moved closer to the bed. "I've spent most of my life believing in nothing but what I can see and touch. God seemed like a convenient fiction people use to explain the inexplicable. And now?" Archer glanced at the sleeping infant, so small and perfect. "I'm not saying I'm ready to join Reverend Wilson's congregation, but when I held your son, something happened. I can't explain it." "Some things don't need explanation," Beatrice said. "They just are." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Elijah entered, his expression grim. "Riders approaching from the south, boss. About a dozen. Blackwater's with them." Archer's jaw tightened. "Get everyone in position. No one fires until I give the order." As Elijah left, Archer turned back to Beatrice. "Stay here. Keep away from the windows. Mrs. Hollister will remain with you." Fear flashed in her eyes, but she nodded. "Be careful. Matthew needs to know the man who delivered him." The simple statement hit Archer with unexpected force. He nodded once, then left the room, collecting his rifle on the way out. On the porch of the ranch house, he surveyed the approaching riders. They had stopped just beyond rifle range, clearly assessing the ranch's defenses. Through his spyglass, Archer could make out the scarred leader, and beside him, a larger man with a distinctive black beard, James Blackwater himself. "What do you want?" Archer shouted when they made no move to advance or retreat. Blackwater urged his horse forward a few paces. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, Landry. Lost me good men." "You started this when you attacked my ranch," Archer called back. "Leave now, and we can end it without more bloodshed." A harsh laugh was the response. That's not how this works. You took something that belongs to me. I aim to get it back. I have nothing of yours, Archer replied. Though he suspected Blackwater meant Beatrice and Matthew trophies the outlaw believed he was entitled to after the chase. That woman and her brat, Blackwater confirmed. Send them out, and maybe we let you live. Anger surged through Archer, cold and clarifying. That's not going to happen. Then we burn this place to the ground and take them anyway, Blackwater threatened. You're outnumbered, Landry. Look again, Archer replied calmly. As if on cue, riders appeared on the ridge behind the outlaws, at least 20 men on horseback, led by Sheriff Daniels. Archer had suspected the territorial marshal would be too slow to respond, but it seemed Daniels had gathered a substantial posse on his own. The Blackwater Gang turned in surprise, suddenly caught between Archer's fortified ranch and the approaching lawmen. For a tense moment, Archer thought they might attack anyway, choosing to go down fighting, but self-preservation won out. This isn't over, Landry, Blackwater shouted, wheeling his horse around. Not by a long shot. The gang scattered, riding hard to evade the posse. Several shots were exchanged, and Archer saw at least 2 outlaws fall, but Blackwater himself and the scarred leader escaped into the hills. Sheriff Daniels rode up to the ranch house a few minutes later, dismounting with a grimace. Thought you could use some help, he said dryly. Rounded up every able man in town after we found that burning cabin. Your timing's impeccable, Archer acknowledged with genuine gratitude. Though I suspect this isn't the last we've seen of Blackwater. Probably not, Daniels agreed. But we wounded several of them, and the territorial marshal should be here within days. Blackwater's running out of places to hide. He looked toward the house, curiously. Mrs. Gray with you? Whole town's been worried since you both disappeared. Archer nodded. She's inside. She's had her baby. The sheriff's eyebrows shot up in surprise. During all this? Good Lord, mother and child well? They are. It's a boy. She named him Matthew. Something in Archer's tone must have revealed more than he intended, because Daniels gave him a long, assessing look before nodding. Well, I'll be. Never thought I'd see the day. See what day? Archer asked defensively. The day something got under that thick hide of yours, Daniels replied with a hint of a smile. Congratulations. It suits you. Before Archer could respond, the sheriff turned back to his horse. I'll leave a few men here as precaution, but I need to get after Blackwater while the trail's fresh. Appreciate it, Sheriff, Archer said, still processing the man's perceptive comment. As Daniels rode off with most of the posse, Archer returned to the house, a strange lightness in his step, despite the lingering danger. He found Beatrice awake, holding Matthew, who was making soft cooing sounds. Is it over? She asked anxiously. For now, he assured her, drawn irresistibly to the side of the bed. Sheriff Daniels arrived with a posse. Blackwater retreated. Relief washed over her face. Thank God. For once, Archer didn't feel the need to dispute the divine attribution. Instead, he found himself asking, May I? With a nod toward Matthew. Beatrice carefully transferred the infant to his arms. This time, Archer held him with more confidence, marveling at how natural it felt. Matthew looked up at him with unfocused eyes, his tiny face solemn, as if considering this large person who held him. He knows you? Beatrice said softly. You're the first person he saw in this world. Archer swallowed hard, unexpected emotion tightening his throat. He's incredible. You both are. A comfortable silence fell between them as Archer continued to hold the baby, something profound taking root in his heart. Finally, he spoke the thoughts that had been forming since the moment he'd first held Matthew in that hillside cave. I know this is sudden, he began, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain, and I understand if you need time, but I want you to know that there's a place for you here, both of you, if you want it, not just as guests, but permanently. Beatrice's eyes widened. Mr. Landry Archer, are you proposing? Inelegantly, yes, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. I'm not good with words, but last night, when I held your son, when you trusted me with something so precious, something changed in me. I can't explain it, but I know I want to be part of his life, and yours. We barely know each other, she said, though her expression was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "I know enough," Archer replied simply. "I know you're brave and determined. I know you face challenges head on. I know you're willing to sacrifice for those you love." He looked down at Matthew. "And I know that when I look at this child, I see hope for something I thought was lost to me forever, a family." Tears filled Beatrice's eyes. "I don't expect you to take on another man's child." "He's not another man's child," Archer interrupted gently. "He's Matthew. He's himself. And I was there when he entered this world. That counts for something, at least to me." Beatrice reached out to touch his arm, her expression softening. "It counts for everything, but this is a decision that will shape all our lives. I need a little time." "Of course," Archer agreed immediately. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands whenever you're ready." For the next 2 weeks, life at Diamondback Ranch settled into an unexpected rhythm. Beatrice and Matthew remained in Archer's room while he slept in the spare bedroom down the hall. Mrs. Hollister stayed on as a combination nurse and housekeeper, helping Beatrice regain her strength and teaching her the basics of infant care. News arrived that the territorial marshal had finally responded in force, tracking the remaining Blackwater Gang members to a hideout in the Wyoming mountains. James Blackwater himself was killed in the ensuing gunfight, while the scarred leader and 3 others were captured and headed for trial in Omaha. The threat that had loomed over them was finally ended. As July gave way to August, Beatrice grew stronger. She began moving around the ranch house, learning its rhythms and peculiarities. Archer found himself hurrying home from daily ranch work, eager to spend evenings with her and Matthew. They talked for hours after the baby was asleep about their pasts, their hopes, their beliefs. He told her about the war, about the faith he'd lost on blood-soaked battlefields. She shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, her brief marriage to Edward Gray, and her decision to strike out on her own after his death. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, paint the Nebraska sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Matthew sleeping peacefully in Beatrice's arms, she turned to Archer with resolution in her eyes. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said quietly. Archer's heart quickened. "And I have conditions," she stated, surprising him. "I won't be a charity case. If we marry, it will be as true partners. I'll contribute to this ranch, learn what I need to know, work alongside you." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Archer assured her, admiration growing. "What else?" "Matthew will know the truth about his father when he's old enough. Edward wasn't perfect, but he deserves to be remembered." "Of course," Archer agreed readily. "Any boy should know where he comes from." Beatrice hesitated, then added, "And I want us to attend church, not every Sunday perhaps, but sometimes. Faith is important to me, even if you don't share it. I won't ask you to believe, but I want Matthew to have the chance to decide for himself." This was harder, but looking at her earnest face, Archer found he couldn't refuse. "I can agree to that. I can't promise I'll ever believe what Reverend Wilson preaches, but I respect your faith. It's part of who you are." She studied him for a long moment. "One more thing. I need to know this isn't just about Matthew, that you're not simply being noble, taking responsibility for a woman and child you helped in desperate circumstances." Archer took her free hand in his, choosing his words carefully. "When I first saw you getting off that stagecoach, something made me take notice. I didn't understand it then. But these past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength, your kindness, your determination, I'm not marrying you because of Matthew. I'm marrying you if you'll have me because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." Tears glistened in her wheat-colored eyes. "Then yes, Archer Landry, I will marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Reverend Wilson officiating. The entire town of Scottsbluff seemed to attend, curious to witness the transformation of the infamous Archer Landry, once known for his cynicism and solitary nature. Sheriff Daniels served as best man, while Mrs. Peterson, the boarding house owner, stood up with Beatrice. Matthew, dressed in a christening gown Mrs. Hollister had sewn, slept through most of the proceedings in the arms of a doting ranch hand's wife. When Reverend Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Archer kissed his bride with a gentleness that belied his rough exterior, sealing a promise he had never expected to make. The cheers of the assembled guests seemed to affirm what many had already begun to whisper, that Archer Landry had found something on that desperate night that went beyond mere survival. That evening, after the guests had departed and Matthew was settled in his new nursery, formerly the spare bedroom, now transformed with the help of the ranch wives, Archer and Beatrice stood together on the porch of what was now truly their home. "Happy, Mrs. Landry?" Archer asked, his arm around her waist. "Very," she confirmed, leaning into him. "Though it still feels like a dream sometimes. 6 months ago, I was a frightened widow in Chicago. Now, I'm a rancher's wife in Nebraska, with a new baby and a new life." "Any regrets?" he asked, a trace of insecurity in his voice. Beatrice turned to face him, her hands framing his face. "Not one. This is exactly where I'm meant to be, where we're all meant to be." In the nursery, Matthew began to cry, his timing impeccable as always. Beatrice smiled. "Duty calls." "I'll come with you," Archer said, following her inside. Together, they entered the nursery, where Matthew was squirming in his crib, tiny fists waving in protest at being left alone. Beatrice lifted him, soothing him with gentle words, while Archer watched, still amazed by how naturally she took to motherhood. "Would you like to hold him while I warm his milk?" Beatrice asked, already transferring the baby to Archer's waiting arms. Archer cradled Matthew against his chest, the now familiar weight settling something in his soul. The baby quieted immediately, looking up at him with eyes that seemed to hold infinite trust. "There now," Archer murmured. "Your mama will be right back. We're just fine, you and me." As he rocked gently back and forth, he found himself humming a half-forgotten lullaby his own mother had sung, decades earlier. Matthew's eyelids grew heavy, his tiny body relaxing into sleep once more. Beatrice returned with the milk, pausing in the doorway to watch them, her heart full at the sight of her strong, stoic husband, utterly captivated by her son. "He's asleep again," Archer whispered, carefully laying Matthew back in his crib. "Guess he just wanted to be held." "Don't we all?" Beatrice replied softly, setting aside the unneeded milk. They stood together beside the crib, watching the sleeping infant. Archer's arm slipped around Beatrice's waist, drawing her close. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For trusting me with him. For giving me a family when I thought I'd always be alone." Beatrice turned in his embrace, her eyes meeting his in the dim light. "You were never alone, Archer. Even when you didn't believe in anything beyond yourself. Something was watching over you, guiding you toward this moment. Years ago, such a statement would have triggered his cynicism, his adamant disbelief. But now, looking at his sleeping son, that was how he already thought of Matthew, and holding his wife in his arms, Archer found he couldn't dismiss the possibility so easily. "Maybe you're right," he conceded. "I don't know what I believe anymore, except that this you and Matthew is more than I ever thought I'd have, more than I thought I deserved." "Love isn't about deserving," Beatrice said gently. "It's about accepting, receiving the gift with an open heart." As they left the nursery hand in hand, Archer reflected that perhaps faith began the same way, not with grand declarations or unshakable certainty, but with a willingness to accept that some things in life defied explanation, yet were no less real for it. 5 years later, Diamondback Ranch had prospered beyond even Archer's ambitious expectations. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. Matthew, now an energetic 5-year-old, had been joined by 3-year-old Emma and 1-year-old James. Beatrice had proven herself not just a devoted mother, but a capable partner in the ranch operations, keeping the books with precision and developing a small but thriving dairy operation that supplemented the cattle income. On a crisp September morning, Archer stood on the porch, watching Matthew help Elijah with the horses, the boy's blond head bent in concentration as the old foreman showed him how to check a hoof for stones. Pride swelled in Archer's chest, along with a familiar sense of wonder that this life was truly his. "Papa, look!" Matthew called, spotting him. "I'm helping Mr. Elijah with thunder." "I see that," Archer called back. "You're doing a fine job, son." The word son came naturally now, without hesitation or qualification. From the moment Archer had signed the adoption papers on Matthew's first birthday, making legal what his heart had already decided, the boy had been his in every way that mattered. Beatrice emerged from the house, baby James on her hip, Emma trailing behind, clutching a doll. "There you are," she said, smiling at her husband. "We're ready whenever you are." It was Sunday, and they were preparing for their monthly trip to church in Scottsbluff. True to their agreement, Archer accompanied his family to services regularly. Though his own relationship with faith remained complex, he might never embrace all of Reverend Wilson's teachings, but he had come to appreciate the community and values the church represented. "Let me get Matthew," Archer said, stepping off the porch. "He's helping Elijah this morning." As they drove the wagon into town an hour later, Matthew chattering excitedly beside him, Emma and James secure with Beatrice in the back, Archer reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from the cynical, solitary rancher who had once declared he believed in nothing but his own gun to a husband and father of 3, part of a community he had once held at arm's length. The change had begun that desperate night in a hillside cave when a new life had entered the world in the most unlikely of circumstances. Holding Matthew for the first time, Archer had glimpsed something beyond his limited understanding, a purpose, a connection to something larger than himself. Was that God? Archer still couldn't say for certain, but he had come to believe in something beyond mere chance or coincidence. The series of events that had brought Beatrice into his life, that had placed him in that cave at that precise moment, that had transformed his heart from hardened survivor to devoted family man. All of it suggested a design he couldn't fully comprehend, but had learned to accept. They reached the church just as the bell began to ring. Reverend Wilson greeted them warmly at the door, bending down to speak to Matthew at eye level, as was his custom. "And how are you today, young man?" the minister asked. "Very well, sir," Matthew replied with the politeness Beatrice had instilled in him. "Papa let me help with the horses this morning. I'm learning to be a rancher." "Just like your father?" Reverend Wilson nodded, his eyes twinkling as they met Archer's. "A fine ambition." As they took their seats in the familiar pew, Emma climbing onto Archer's lap for a better view, while Beatrice settled James on her knee, the Reverend began the service with words that resonated with Archer in a way they never had before his family came into his life. "Faith," Wilson intoned, "is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." Archer looked at his children, at his wife, at the life he had never dared to hope for, yet had been given despite his disbelief. If that wasn't evidence of things unseen, he didn't know what was. Beatrice's hand found his, squeezing gently as if she could read his thoughts. Perhaps she could. After 5 years together, they had developed the kind of understanding that sometimes seemed to transcend words. That evening, after the children were asleep, Archer and Beatrice sat on the porch swing, enjoying the cool night air and rare moment of quiet. "Penny for your thoughts," Beatrice said, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. Archer smiled, his arm tightening around her. "Just thinking about how much has changed, how much I've changed. For the better, I hope," she teased. "Definitely for the better," he assured her. "I was just remembering something Reverend Wilson said this morning about faith being the evidence of things not seen." Beatrice looked up at him curiously. "And what do you think of that now?" Archer considered the question seriously. I think I understand it better than I used to. Not just intellectually, but here." He placed his free hand over his heart. "When I look at Matthew, at Emma and James, at you, I see evidence of something I can't fully explain, something bigger than mere chance." "That sounds suspiciously like faith," Beatrice observed with a gentle smile. "Maybe it is," Archer conceded. "Not the kind that needs a church or a Bible, necessarily, but a belief that there's more to this life than what we can see or touch, that some things, the most important things, can't be proven, only experienced." "Like love," Beatrice suggested. "Exactly like love," he agreed, turning to kiss her softly. "No one can prove love exists, but we know it does. We feel it." From inside the house came a small cry. James, likely disturbed by a dream. Before Beatrice could rise, Archer stood. "I'll go," he said. "You've been on your feet all day." In the nursery, he found James standing in his crib, tears streaking his chubby cheeks. "Hey there, little man," Archer said softly, lifting him. "Bad dream?" The baby hiccuped, then settled against his father's chest, tiny fingers clutching Archer's shirt. As he rocked slowly back and forth, soothing his youngest son back to sleep, Archer found himself offering a silent prayer of gratitude, not to any specific deity or according to any formal religion, but to whatever force or design had brought him to this moment. For a man who had once believed in nothing beyond what he could control with his own hands, it was perhaps as close to traditional faith as he would ever come. But looking down at the sleeping child in his arms, at the two other children sleeping peacefully in their rooms, thinking of the remarkable woman who had chosen to share her life with him, Archer Landry knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was sacred. This was holy. This was worth believing in. And it had all begun on a desperate night in a hillside cave when a woman he barely knew had placed her newborn son in his arms, and something long dormant within him had awakened at last.